Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our next Burnout Triumphants episode. My name is Georgi, and I will be the host tonight. With me here, I'm having Lino Velev, a serial entrepreneur and founder of a couple of startups, and advisor to 100 or more entrepreneurs from the UK and across the world. Lino is working, one of the companies of Lino is called Farstar, which is a business accelerator. And together with the Royal Academy of Engineering in London, they are acting as an accelerator for 17 countries from the global south. Lino will have the opportunity to introduce himself and tell us more about what exactly they are doing in a minute. Tonight, he's here with the main mission to share his real life and extremely touching and interesting story about his burnout episode a couple of years ago. He will share with us how it all went, what did he go through, and how did he manage to come out of this roller coaster better, stronger, and smarter than ever before. Before I give the floor to Lino, I would like to give a quick shout out on DigiBurn Health. DigiBurn Health is the organizer of Burnout Triumphants and Burnout Talks, which is one of our initiatives for achieving a burnout-free society. With our online events, we promote discussion on burnout. We want to spread global awareness and provoke people to think more about all those risky factors and risky patterns in their lifestyle and how to become better individuals, do more and devote even more energy to what they are really burning for without the risk of burning out. So essentially, in a nutshell, achieving a much better work-life balance and energy levels throughout their daily missions. Our other initiative with DigiBurn Health is a digital app, a self-help tool that we are developing with a team of experts in psychology, behavioral science, and mobile apps to create a tool that enables young and experienced professionals track their current well-being, understand better what are they doing well or what they could improve in their daily lifestyle and daily routines so that they can ensure keeping their strong and drive and fire in the belly for the long term without going down the risky road for burning out. Our app is going to be out very soon. In a couple of weeks' time, we are launching our beta. And now we're looking for our first early adopters and beta testers. So if this would be something for you, do make sure to check out the description below and make sure to subscribe and become one of our earliest adopters. Speaking of the comment section, the live session tonight is planned to be around 45 minutes. However, feel free to join with any comments or ideas, thoughts regarding the discussed topics. Just put a comment in the section below, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the end of the session. Please feel invited to join us here. Now, let's come back to Lino. Lino, good evening.
Hey, Gary, how are you? Great to be here.
Thank you. Well, it's a great honor and pleasure having you here. I know that you're spread between the UK and Bulgaria. How come that we are lucky having you here tonight?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously over the last year or so, we haven't traveled as much as usual. And I guess I'm lucky enough to be here for a couple of months now and get to enjoy the sun and the nature and kind of Europe overall unlocking and opening up, which is really uplifting, if I may do say so myself. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, again, welcome. And I'm very excited for everything you have to share. Actually, for our audience, if you remember our Burnout Talks episode 1, Lino was one of the guests and we received so much positive feedback and so many people were asking, hey, can we hear more about Lino and what he has been through? So that's the reason of us having him here. Lino, would you mind perhaps introducing yourself in short? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What are you up to?
Yeah, of course, with pleasure. So how to start? I guess I've been in the tech world since I was very young. I always were really into engineering and making stuff and building stuff and coding from a young age and so on. And I ended up ultimately getting involved with starting companies around different digital products over the years. I've run 2 or 3 companies to more permanent ones where we were building different mobile products. Then I got involved with a number of different programs and investors and so on in helping them run initiatives for supporting investment in startups and just building the community. I started a couple of non-profit things myself in that space. And through that, I've done a little bit of work around the policy side of things as well, around innovation. Most recently, I'm running a company called Farstar. And with it, among other things we do, generally this company is trying to act as a venture builder for businesses which have certain types of environmental and social impact. And I have a strong belief that the most powerful way for us to really have an impact on our environment is to create high growth, for-profit, technology-enabled business models that when they are able to grow and have a natural side effect, which is a desirable outcome, that tends to kind of produce that outcome in a far more powerful way than anything we might do with funding, public policy, just pure advocacy and so on, if all that makes sense, right? And with that company, one of the main things we do is we run a program together with the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK, where we set up business accelerators in 17 countries in the global south. And we look for academics who have impactful research, and we help them commercialize that and bring it to market.
All right, that's very interesting. Thanks. And how do you help those companies to succeed in the high profit business modeling?
Yeah, right. So I guess in that particular space, what we're seeing, one of the things we're seeing in venture capital and in the technology scenes in general is that we are starting to work more and more on problems that kind of touch on things like life sciences, food tech, agri-tech, healthcare, where you kind of have a little bit more added complexity compared to just pure digital companies and products, which kind of used to be, or still is kind of the mainstream venture capital territory. And when we're dealing with those, there's quite a bit of, as I mentioned, complexity that's related to the research side of things and to regulation, to clinical trials and stuff like that. And I feel it's increasingly important these days to engage the academic communities and just, these people that work on things like genetics, biotechnology, medicine, like chemistry and so on. They have really important contributions that now we can bring to market much more rapidly than we could a couple of decades ago, because of a number of things that happened in the general space that we probably shouldn't really dig into on that call, on this session, right? But what we try to do is really go to where these very smart and capable academics are, who are generally not so exposed to the business world, and help them develop entrepreneurial skills and understand how to run their career as entrepreneurs, and leverage things like building teams, companies, raising capital, going to market, just hacking their way with a completely different mindset. And then on a further note, we want to set up an actual investment vehicle to back people like that.
Amazing. All those mentioned areas are typically known for being a little bit slower and a little bit more cumbersome to actually gain any strong foot there. So I'm grabbing on that opportunity. Given we have anybody amongst our audience right now or later on as well from the mentioned fields, are you open? Would it make sense for such people to actually reach out to you and Farstar?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, at the moment, if you're based in Southeast Europe and you work in one of the fields I mentioned and you're interested in commercializing your research, we are very keen on speaking with you at the moment and seeing if you can participate in some kind of an investment deal in your future company or existing company.
Perfect.
Yeah, so please get in touch.
Yeah, everybody, this was an open promise. Just have a look at the description below. We'll link Farstar and Lino, and make sure to reach out.
As well.
Cool. So if we come back to you, who are you? Could you perhaps review a little bit about yourself? You described yourself as an entrepreneur. What does this actually mean?
I don't know if that's my core identity, if that makes sense. I mean, or is my core identity at the moment. I kind of tend to look at myself as somebody who is maybe a failed scientist or a failed great engineer or something like that. And I find a lot more romanticism in that, like a failed inventor, if you will. However, what I learned throughout my life is that in order to bring these very technical, geeky topics to the world, which is kind of what I care about, and I want to make things that people use and find value in, and this gives me a lot of pleasure, and that used to be that was the case since I was very little. So I kind of what I figured out is that that role is not so much in the technical domain entirely, but then it involves also the how do you bring it to people domain, if that makes sense, which is kind of more on the business domain. And one thing led to another, and that's what I ended up doing. And I took those entrepreneurial roles in those different organizations I either started or participated in, and so on. And if you want me to answer the second question, what is an entrepreneur? Which I think is what you're possibly asking. Did you want me to talk about that a little bit more? Or?
Yeah, sure, please. This would be helpful.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe there are many definitions, and I'm not kind of claiming that there's one way to talk about it. I know kind of the roots of the etymology of that word comes from French, and I haven't really necessarily looked into where it comes from. But the way I understand it and the definition I've seen is an entrepreneur is somebody who mobilizes people, capital, resources, and assumes responsibility towards the creation of some new type of value, right? Mm-hmm. So if we break this down, the first bit deals with resources and capital and people and so on, which we can think about as forms of leverage, right? So if you want to build something, you can take a loan from a bank and you can just contribute a bit of money, and then you leverage the money from the bank, and then you create value with all that money, not just the bit you contribute, right? So that's an example of leverage. As entrepreneurs, their core job is to kind of mobilize a lot of leverage, so they have more oomph in whatever they're doing. It's not just doing the work yourself. And by definition, actually, I think the entrepreneurial part of that doesn't entail you doing the work by definition, but in practice, you do a lot of it at the beginning. I mean, there's really rarely a way to go about it entirely. And then the second bit is assuming responsibility, right? So the entrepreneur in this whole ecosystem of different resources, people, and agents, somebody needs to go out there and say, this is what we need to do. And I'm going to take the risk with in kind of getting us there, and work with me to make this happen because it makes sense. And then that's kind of you mobilize. I mean, you take responsibility on some level. That responsibility is not necessarily unlimited, but kind of that's the defining bit. And then I think the third bit is just thinking through some kind of a vision of what value, kind of what's wrong with the world, the way it looks at the moment, and kind of how can we reorganize it a little bit to make it better by some dimension for somebody, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you combine those three things, this is what an entrepreneur does. That's how I think about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. It seems entrepreneur is a very let's say multifaceted word. Everybody seems to have a little bit of an own take on it. But allow me to come back to the failed scientist / engineer. I really love it. I don't know how did you come up with that, but it sounds very, very funky and sexy. Let's use it as a stepping stone. Why would you define yourself as a failed, and what does failure mean in a general sense?
Oh, I guess that's not what I ultimately ended up doing in my day-to-day life. I mean, I don't think I'm necessarily publishing papers to discovering new things on kind of this very fundamental level, and that's kind of what I thought I would do when I was very young, and then I ended up doing something else. So in that sense, I guess I failed with my initial intention, and I don't necessarily consider that in a negative way, but that's how I meant on that sense. We can talk about failure if you want. I mean, that's a very popular topic in that space, but I don't know if you want to drive the conversation there.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm quite keen. So having you here as a Burnout Triumphant, obviously and our audience is...
I love this title, by the way.
Yeah?
No. And I can tell you why later.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad title for the show or whatever. Just that is not necessarily how I would think of myself, but I kind of like what it represents very much. So I'm kind of 100% behind it.
So let's start there then. Tell us a little bit more about your understanding and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I guess we had a chat beforehand, and we talked about a bunch about these topics, and we did talk about it last time. And What I kind of maybe take a little bit of issue with is that, when I went through this similar experience for the first time myself years back, um, they seem to be really no awareness of kind of that this is something that people experience and it's not so rare. That at least that I was exposed to, and now I think the world is very different and it's a lot better in that sense. But I kind of think that's super common that people around me, especially people that do anything of interest. And it's kind of where we're going to talk particularly about why entrepreneurs are more susceptible to this, why they suffer more, why the suicide rates are so much higher there, and so on. But that can also be said for actors and artists. It can be said for therapists. It can be said for maybe some parents compared to non-parents, or vice versa. I'm not really sure about that one, but you can probably attribute it to a lot of roles that we have in society that entail some form of high standards and high responsibility, and some other aspects that again we can dig into. So that's one thing, and I think a lot of really, really interesting people I know have been going through these things. And the second issue I take is that kind of when we put some pompous, not pompous, but when we put a lot of behind it, we kind of make it as some kind of a really big deal. And I think we should make a big deal of bringing awareness to these topics and of moving society. And I think this is what you're trying to do. And I'm 100% behind it. I've often wanted to do stuff like that myself. I've started a couple of small initiatives and haven't done it into something really focused. I've always kind of, when I run these accelerated programs and I mentor people and do coaching, I create space for us to talk about mental fitness and just this more soft side of things, or more personal side of things. So in that sense, I really appreciate the triumphant part. But then on the flip side, I think on a personal level, I think it's something that we should normalize a little bit. And it's almost like people in their adolescence tend to maybe sometimes break a bone when they do sports. And that's not, it's not a huge deal necessarily. I mean, I guess if you're an athlete and you break a bone, that's something maybe expected that you might do it. And it's probably a big deal to your sports career at that point. So it has really big implications and big effects. And that's 100% the same story if you're an entrepreneur or any sort of, if you will, mentor or intellectual knowledge worker, sort of athlete analogous type of role. But also it's something that we kind of know about, and it's kind of normal, and we brush it off, and we kind of approach it in a very pragmatic and organized way, and we move on from it. And we don't need to run a show about broken leg triumphants, right? I mean, I actually, the only bone I've broken is my nose, really, like really badly, and like on a sports accident. But I imagine like in this room there would be other people that at some point might have broken a bone, right? So that's kind of why I want to change the sentiment a little bit in this whole. And maybe it's too early to that, but does it make sense? Do you see what I mean? It's just we should treat it as something normal. It's kind of part of growing up. It's something that we should avoid, because if we were running a workplace and then like 30% of people were breaking their legs every year, like we wouldn't really think that's okay, right? And that's a reality of a lot of workplaces. And I think it's your mission to kind of change that. Right.
Yes,
and in that sense, I think that's something we should really advocate against. Yes. But at the same time, it's kind of a normal trajectory. When you push yourself, you kind of go through these things sometimes when you kind of trip over and you get up, and ideally you get a bit of support and space to recover, and you kind of move on and you grow up in the process. That's how I think about it.
Absolutely. And I agree 100%. So yes, definitely. Also the example with the broken leg, I find it very, very spot on. The reason for the triumphant part of the branding of our initiative and show is actually focused somewhere else. Once we started DG Burnout more than 1 year ago, and during the process of developing the concept, researching what's going on, who is suffering, why are people suffering, we found out that actually a lot of people never recognized being in a burnout. And a lot of people who actually have been through a burnout are very unsecure and rather lackluster to share their thoughts with the open world.
Yeah.
So during our research, it turned out, after speaking with a couple of people who have been through burnout, it turned out that once they started speaking, a lot more other people reached out to them, and only then they actually understood that, hey, maybe something is going wrong. So the main aim of our initiative here, to really make sure that we are on one page with the audience as well, the main aim here is not to make burnout seem like something fancy. I completely agree with Lino. It's like breaking your leg. However, our mission here is to help millions of people globally, to make them think and make them realize that perhaps there are certain risky patterns that they have already ongoing, and take proactive measures before actually going into a burnout. Burnout is neither something sexy, nor is something that should be put on a pedestal or on being something of a goal, because it's really a serious condition. And our mission is helping people avoid it, or also treat it in the earlier phases where it's still treatable. Anyway, really appreciate your comment.
I wasn't trying to criticize. I was trying to create some fun with it. But
absolutely.
I'm 100% behind this. What you just said. I mean, I really feel strongly about this.
Absolutely. So again, very important, being proactive and open. Even in our discussions here, we never know what it's our guest going to say and so on. That makes it so much more personal and so much better and interesting for the audience as well. Speaking about the audience, a short info break. Please make sure to use the comment section if you have any questions, or you find anything that Lino or myself say interesting, or you would like to know something more. Make sure to take part of our conversation tonight. Now, back to Lino. Could you tell us, perhaps, can we move towards your burnout story? Essentially, that's why we're here, and I think all of us want to know more. What was there?
Yeah, so I think there were a few of them, really, and I probably wouldn't cover in great detail of them, but I think the big takeaways were that it's something that a lot of people around me were also experiencing, and I want to kind of echo on what you just said, that once you started talking about it and just being a little bit open about it with your peers, you realize that a lot of other people have had similar experiences, and they can help you, or just advise you, or just create some space for you to deal with this and would understand. And in my case, let's give you a story, right? The big case when it kind of really happened quite badly was maybe 6 years ago, when I was kind of part of the management of this company, and we ran into some trouble with the company, and then I had a bunch of family issues and personal issues on top of them, and then I was trying to start a new initiative on top of that. I was trying to set up a new company that I wanted to start. And I just kept working insane hours and pushing myself, and had this work hard, party hard mentality, and I'll sleep when I die type of thing, which were things I actually used to say at the time. I think differently now, but it just that felt so well. And I was I was 28, 29, still had like infinite energy, felt invincible and invulnerable, and so on. And what kind of ultimately happened was that I started experiencing this, I don't know how to describe it, maybe anxiety attacks, or just these states where I just couldn't function anymore the way I used to. So I couldn't focus for hours at a time. I couldn't sleep. I became, my energy dropped like significantly. I just couldn't get. I became a little bit cynical about my work, and it just ended up being kind of this downward spiral where my performance was dropping, and then things were getting behind, and then this was creating even more backlog of problems to solve, and this was just pumping up. And the thing is, it kind of transitioned into something that I wouldn't describe as a crisis anymore, because I kind of am historically fairly good at dealing with crisis. But the good thing about the crisis is that that it's kind of very intense and short term, and then it ends typically. Then at least it should be like that, and it just gives you a very clear thing to focus on. but then when it becomes kind of chronic, it becomes very difficult to deal with, because the last time you felt normal or okay or good, sometimes it gets so far behind you that you can't even remember what it looked like when you passed the post where it no longer felt like things are going well. And then you kind of might end up in this downward spiral, and that's kind of what happened with me, where I started kind of getting sick on airplanes, and just had a horrible year overall, to the point where everything kind of crashed and I couldn't meet my daily responsibilities to people. I strained a lot of relationships because I became kind of difficult, and people, I think, especially close people around me, couldn't really understand why I'm behaving in a certain way, because they weren't aware that I was going through some kind of mental challenge, and I think I wasn't aware myself, so I couldn't really communicate in a meaningful way about it. And that led ultimately to the destruction of several relationships I treasured, and to me having to essentially drop some work I was doing at the time, and I was forced to take a couple of months off, because it just came to the point where nothing I was trying to do anymore would work, and I couldn't produce anything. I mean, I became fairly professionally and personally dysfunctional in terms of the work I used to find easy and actually enjoyable up to not that long ago. So that's kind of a very high level description of, the stages you might go through.
Yeah. And do you happen to have a way to depict the different stages you went through? Now, having in hindsight with 10, do you actually make a difference between stage 1, 2, 3, or however, or whatever they were?
To be honest, that's a very good question, and I haven't really thought about it in a strict way like that. I think a good metaphor for how these things tend to happen, or at least how I've allowed them to happen, because I've been through a lot of, like most of us. I mean, I'm not thinking I'm special in any way, but I can definitely recall very, very intense episodes where things like there's been a big accident, or somebody you care about dies, or like a project you're doing disintegrates, or something really bad happens to the world, which just makes you feel uneasy about it. And then I've kind of come through these things, and there were very high intensity periods of discomfort, which were followed by certain choices being made, decisions being made, coping with them in a certain way, and then organizing your life after you've adapted to that. And whether that's pleasant or not, then to what extent you tend to move through those things, and those are fine. But where things got really bad is when these things kind of onset on very small steps, or steps where you kind of normalize them, and they became kind of part of your normal life. And I think a good metaphor is, how do you boil a living frog, right? Do you know that one? How do you boil a living frog? I mean, it's in English they use it a lot, but
perhaps we can find out tonight.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is that if you put the frog in water and you start heating up the water very slowly, the pain receptors in the skin of the frog won't get triggered if you warm up the water slowly enough, so you can kill and boil the frog alive without it realizing it's being boiled, right? And that's kind of what I think happens to people in these situations, and it definitely happened to me. It's kind of the heat of everything that's happening around you increases ever so slightly, that you can kind of normalize what's happening at the moment and just push through. I'll just carry on. I'll deal with this. We need to be resilient. We need to be tough about this. We need to push through. And kind of you keep on doing this same sort of thing for a long time without actually making any structural decisions or choices. Because sometimes there's something you can do, but very often, and almost always, you can kind of quit things. You can drop things. You can proactively say, okay, this is not working. Let's step back. Let's look at this from 10,000 feet and think about it and reorganize. But then if things are kind of getting worse very, very slowly, is the mic okay, by the way? Yeah, okay. When things are kind of going for the worst, towards the worst very slowly, it's sometimes easy to kind of allow your entire life to slip into this state of chronic stress and disarray, and then it becomes very difficult to pick on something and then restructure it and kind of get out of that, because it just becomes a web of complicated things that you've allowed to take over your professional, personal, whatever life. And this is I think the first stage might be stress happens, and you might end up just being at that first stage and moving out of it and coming into it, and then if you get this rest in between, that's absolutely fine. But then the second stage is when this kind of, you allow this to become chronic and there's no breaks in between, and even if it's not very intense, or you might think it's not very intense, then it becomes really bad, because you don't get to recover at all, and you kind of consistently drop into a lower baseline. And then I think there's a third stage, at least reflecting on my experience, where this starts affecting you and your ability to cope with things to a level where now this is kind of a downward spiral, where this starts having, your ability to cope starts having a negative effect on the objective reality around you, your work, or so on, which actually increases the stress, which increases the pressure on you and your inability to even to cope with it even further. So it's kind of you get into increasing more debt, and towards the solution, and you end up in a situation where there are no obvious exits from this spiral, right? And this has now been normalized for your peers, your stakeholders and stuff like that a long time ago. So it's very difficult to now come and say, listen, this is really bad. You need to pick it up out of something seemingly small at the time, and kind of step back and to get everybody to understand. And you can mobilize on that. You need to be very self-aware and understand what's happening very well. You need to be able to articulate it very well to get out of that at that point. And when you can't, and at the time I couldn't, then it gets really bad. And then I think the fourth stage might be where you just default, because you get to a point where you can't cope anymore. Things are getting worse and worse, and you just need to kind of say, I can't do it anymore. And that's something that you could have probably easily done months earlier in most cases, and everybody would have understood. But then months later, it's kind of hard, or it might not be that hard, but you might think it's very hard and that nobody's going to understand, and you can't really drop your responsibility. This happens, I think, more to more analytical, more kind of responsible people. I mean, they would probably be on a bigger risk factor towards that sort of situation, and then you need to default and start over, right? And then you need to figure out how do you bounce back from that. Yeah.
How long did it all that take for you? So from beginning, I guess you weren't aware at the very beginning, but how long were you boiling in hot water without knowing?
In that particular case, I would say it was about 18 months.
18?
Yeah, 18 months.
Okay.
They were very, very unpleasant. Yeah, it just and this came on the back of a massive, bullish run, if you want to call it, or things were going great and everything was amazing and things were improving, and I was super happy and I was really excited about these projects and everything was working, right? I mean, you get this kind of almost manic about it, which kind of becomes part of the problem, and then from then on, it's sometimes you kind of get stuck, but you don't make the choices to course correct in a meaningful way, and you get you allow this to happen, and I did not manage it very well at the time. Yeah.
And were there any symptoms or anything that you actually saw besides the performance drop?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think we or at least my experience was that you don't we all have things which can kind of put us on, stress is not by definition a bad thing, right? That's what I want to say. I mean, going out for a run, that puts stress on your body, right? But that then makes you feel, then you're tired and you probably need to eat, drink water and relax for a while, but then you come out of it stronger than you were, energized. It gives you a lot that you can apply in the next day of your life, and then you can run even faster next time, right? So I mean, our bodies, ourselves, we were designed to stress ourselves and do stuff. I mean, when you go to hunt an animal, I mean, that's stress, right? It gives you adrenaline, it gives you cortisol, it gives you kind of all of these things that go in your bloodstream that fulfill a useful function, right? But they're not designed to be as an ongoing thing, right? When you get cortisol in your blood, it does all kinds of things, which allows you to it allows your body to kind of, if you get a cut and you start bleeding, your blood coagulates faster, for example, and it allows you to survive kind of cuts. It allows your body to burn the proteins in your muscles, so you can get energy from them if you run out of hydrocarbons in your bloodstream and stuff like that. But then, like this being it makes your kind of hard work harder and stuff, but then if you kind of spend months in that state of high cortisol, that's incredibly detrimental to your physical state, right? Short term is useful, adrenaline short term is useful as long as it kind of goes through the spikes, right? What was the question we were talking about? symptomatics. Yeah, right. So when you kind of get in this state of chronic stress, I think you kind of partially lose the ability to get through these. Sorry, I thought I muted that, but you kind of lose the ability to get through your recovery stages well, right? Because when you get through a lot of stress, this is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And it works or doesn't work, but then you maybe have some kind of ritual where you go for a run, or you go with your mates to the pub, or you go to the opera to listen to music, or whatever rocks your boat, right? And these things, they kind of rejuvenate you. They give you a different type of medicine to your body, and you can kind of switch to that, and then you move on from that experience. You took what you could from it, and then you're energized to go in the next one. And this kind of cycling approach is very, very healthy in my mind, and just expands you the more you go through kind of intense edges of that without going over your limits, right? However, when you're under chronic stress, I think at some point you lose your ability to rejuvenate and recover, because then you might end up in a situation where you just can't enjoy a night out with your friends, or you can't enjoy something else you're doing, and you kind of miss out on that recovery stage. And then you need to go into work again, or you just don't have the time to go through those recovery stages. And I think a very important symptom is when you kind of lose the ability to really enjoy these things and recover from them. And you need to be very aware if that's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
A different symptom might be that you just stop seeing the purpose in what you're doing to some extent. And you feel that you're just grinding because you don't have a choice, but it's not something that comes out of you because you desire to do this on some level, but it's just just there's not an option. And I think when you start thinking like that for an extended period of time, that's problematic. Another thing is just the health of your relationships. When you find that it's very hard for you to be present in relationships, or to find some form of connection and joy from them, and you kind of become disconnected and distant, that's a problematic symptom. And I can probably come up with more of those, but it's things like that generally that you should monitor.
And at some point you mentioned the reactions of your close people and social circle. Firstly, what was the impact on your social connections? I mean, you going through your burnout, hot water boiling experience. And secondly, did you have any kind of a support circle? So were there any helpful or, let's say, supportive reactions?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I've been very, very fortunate to have been able to build an amazing support network around myself, to have great people that can help me and are willing to help me and are kind of there for me and so on. On the professional side of things, right? When I need to actually solve a tangible problem, but then when it comes through my personal life, I realized, and that's not necessarily because of the people around me entirely, but it's partially, I think, related to the maturity of the culture of understanding somebody who's going through something like that, especially when you haven't yourself. And I recognize in retrospect that before I learned about these kind of sides to my character, existence, whatever, I might have been a little bit tone deaf to the similar experiences of other people, which I kind of maybe couldn't fully understand at the time. And now I think through these experiences develop an extended sense of empathy that I can understand, and that's been very useful. But for me, I guess I wasn't receiving the support I needed on that level on one side, and also maybe when people were trying to offer that support, I maybe wasn't necessarily allowing them to. Because that's kind of a different thing, which is part of the solution, to actually enable people to help you going through these stages. And that's I don't know if I have a good answer of how to do that, but that's something that definitely it's not a one-way street of somebody supporting you. You need to be open to receive that support and create the opportunity for that, and even ask for it proactively. I mean, which is kind of a big step at the time, asking for support because you're feeling bad. I mean, it's not something I was necessarily open to do at the time.
Mm-hmm. Understandable.
And ego gets in the way and stuff like that.
Absolutely. We have actually been receiving that input and feedback from so many people we've been speaking with, either the ego or also I'm running the hamster circle, and it's just a momentary experience. I just need to run faster and everything's gonna be fine. Especially
a little bit faster.
Exactly. Especially when you also have subordinates or more people counting on yourself, it's very hard to claim defeat or claim I need some help.
Exactly.
Seems. But was there any specific turnaround point? So essentially the aim of our talk tonight is not only to explain all the bad things that happen, but also think of the proactive things that, or let's say measures that one could undertake to correct things. So was there any kind of a specific turnaround point for yourself?
Yeah, I mean that's what I find surprising at the time, because this state lasted for a long time, and I think it maybe still lasts today. Because
really,
yeah, I think after that, there's like, I guess I've had similar lighter versions of an experience like this in my university or something like that when I was 19 or 20 or something like that. And then throughout the next decade of my life, I somehow ended up being quite resilient. And I ended up continuously exposing myself to increased stress, which in retrospect, there was absolutely no reason why I should have put myself in these situations. But I guess I just could take it, could work longer, push harder, tolerate toxic relationships, tolerate people's behavior, stuff like that, right? And because it was kind of easier to tolerate it and to do something about it, I kept living in that mode for kind of a decade, pretty much. And I was also always incredibly, energetic, happy, positive, helping others, stuff like that. And at one point when this broke, I think, I can't tell you whether my outlook of the world changed. Did I just get a little bit older, or just I'm kind of still not fully out of the after effects of that experience? I honestly can't really tell.
Sorry, when was it?
So this particular one was, I think, about 6 years ago.
6 years ago, and then you claim that you still have after effects.
I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't want to state that. I just. I think I am still kind of learning lessons from that I'm applying to my life, and it's a wealth of resource in retrospect, because it just gives you this, like they say, there's no firmer ground to build on than rock bottom, right? So when you reach rock bottom, you can jump really high from there, and maybe I'm just still bouncing back from that point. I don't know, but.
That's very metaphoric.
Yeah, if you want to become my therapist, we can talk about some of these things for like a long time. I mean, no form of suffering at the moment or anything like that, if that's what you're asking me. I mean, I'm fine, but it's a complex after effect. That's what I'm trying to communicate. And what really surprised me at the time was that when I've been stuck in this really down state for months, getting out of it wasn't kind of a gradual process where we kind of slightly feeling better or something like that. It kind of came up in these rapid bounce backs, right? Where something happens that says, okay, this is good. I'm excited about this. This is kind of, I'm moving away from this mess to this other thing. And it just unlocks some kind of out of nowhere an insane amount of energy. And at least this was my experience, which kind of gets you back to before you had any of those problems. And I think the trick there is to not allow yourself to get sucked into it, because this is very temporary. Mm-hmm. Because for me, what was happening was I wasn't necessarily recovered from kind of this experience. I was just recovering, and it comes in these bursts of energy. And again, this might be different for everybody, but this is how it happened for me. And then I kind of pushed myself again on 110%, and then I burned out again. I'm like, and I went through this yo-yo effect several times until I kind of learned that, okay, things are fixing it themselves. Like, everything's good now. I don't need to kind of worry about this whole thing again anymore, as much as I did for the last, I guess, 12 months, something like that. But then I'm not saying I didn't work for 12 months and I was crying in my bed or anything like that. It's just I'm saying I wasn't 100% the person I thought I used to be, right? And where this might be biased as well, but that's kind of how I looked. This is my outlook of the world for a while. And I think when you kind of start feeling this energy, it's important to kind of savor it and allow it to just settle in and take your time to build some things that are stable, create some kind of a routine and build on top of that. And then I think what tends to happen if you're tactical like that, but if you forget, you just get carried away and you forget that you were ever burnt out, and you just are dealing with whatever excites you at the moment, and you kind of unless you remind yourself you're there, you're probably fine. On the kind of on the mindset level, at least. On the physical level, that's a separate journey, I imagine, which we can talk about it a little bit more. One of my big learnings from that was how connected your mental world is to your physical world, in a way of how your body feels and how you think. I didn't used to combine these things and think of them as one thing, but now I do because of those experiences. So that's something we can talk about a bit more.
And you said that you took some time off. So how did you recover? How long was your time off? What did you do?
Yeah, so I guess the problem with if we want to talk about the entrepreneurial bit of things, the problem with being an entrepreneur, one of the problems there is that if you're running a company and you're solely responsible for that company, which kind of is what you signed up for, right? I mean, and that's all well, but like quitting is not a trivial matter. Like if you've got investors on board, employees on board, like customers on board, and then they all kind of trusted you to do something, or this is what you think anyway. And then you're building this thing, and at some point it doesn't really work, or maybe it worked for a while, but it doesn't work any longer in the same sense, and so on. And it's a very reasonable and sensible thing that after something has fulfilled its purpose, you might want to choose to wind it down or just wrap it up or something like that. And that's not always as simple if you're doing it because you've burnt out. That's not always as simple as just having a job and quitting. And I'm not saying that you can always just quit your job. I don't know, if you're the chief of medicine of some hospital and you know people's lives literally depend on you doing something in your job, it's probably not a trivial decision where you just resign and quit. But still, there's an aspect where having an employment relationship versus having a relationship where you're a founder and director of a company, there's kind of a lot of responsibilities and you need to be mindful of, and just quitting is probably a 3 months at best full-time intense work matter. I mean, if you can, so it's almost irrational to quit so you can get a break, because the process of quitting actually puts even more work for you to do. So they're elegant ways how you can work this through. But I think that the far better solution is just don't allow yourself to burn out to that extent where you can't function at all. And kind of when you see the signals, just make choices, pay the price that's necessary in the short term to avoid a larger price longer term, right? And
so find that topic, that thought I find very interesting, probably also for our audience, since we have a lot of entrepreneurs amongst the people following us. If you could give one advice to your previous self, which one would that be from today's perspective?
Yeah, to my previous self, right?
Yes,
yeah, with all my peculiarities. I think in retrospect, it would be to appreciate that I kind of, people probably don't think of you as infallible as you expect of yourself. So it's kind of okay to drop the ball in certain situations and just, it's not going to be pleasant. I mean, people are going to say, well, this is really bad, right? But then it's also not that bad necessarily as much as I thought, because there were things that I although I was doing these talks about failure and like how we need to embrace the entrepreneurial culture and stuff like that. And there are certain things around which you can kind of fail a little bit without so much repercussion that I put on myself. So and there's kind of tactical quitting, which I should have been more decisive with. And I had a lot of cheap options to do that, but I just tried to keep all the balls in the air, which was kind of a major mistake. And the other one is just to have a bit more confidence in my judgment, because at the time I think intellectually the judgment was correct, but I didn't necessarily act on it as frequently as I should have. And those were kind of my bits that I should have applied in that sense. However, I think those would be very different for different people, because I think we all have our character biases. I mean, some of the people I work with, they suffer from the exact opposite thing. I mean, and so I don't think that's universal. But one thing that is, I think, definitely generic advice that's useful is this is a thing where you need to manage your mental performance if you want to be kind of a very high productivity, high achiever type person. And you have those ambitions, you should think of your mental state and capacity the same way an athlete thinks about their body, and just proactively make it your job to really take care of it. And if you're in any sort of leadership position, mixing kind of messing that up has a 10x effect compared to messing up any activity that you might otherwise delegate to somebody else, because that's something you can't, nobody can fill up the space that you need to take and in order for this group of people to continue operating. So it becomes a super crucial job that you need to do. And it's kind of hard to find a way to do it when you're doing it initially. So that's important.
So again, I'm grabbing the opportunity while we're having this amazing talk with Lino. If anybody has questions or thoughts, just use the comment section, because otherwise we can keep on talking for hours and hours to come. Now, back to Lino. Speaking of rituals, at some point you said, okay, having, an established routine and so on. What do you do nowadays that helps you burn bright instead of out?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if I've kind of mastered it. I think I'm very far from it, but I've definitely made certain important improvements to that. And I think I've seen a lot of friends do far better than I have in some of these rituals. And I think it's really cool that you're talking about rituals, because I think it's very much about rituals and habits, not about doing something very smart in particular. At a certain point, it's just a build up of very simple things that you need to do regularly. And also, I think quite trivial, but I think we should talk about them quite diligently nonetheless. I think sleep is insanely important. I can't believe how much I've gone diametrically opposed to my views on sleep since I did these experiences where I just would not sleep. And one particular thing about sleep is that I realized it's something that I kind of knew about myself, but then it wasn't very cool to, not cool. It's just in so many cultures, we talk about how rising up early in the morning is a virtue, right? But at the same time, I've always throughout my life done my best work at night. And even when I was a kid, I would just wait for everybody to go to sleep, and then I would read something or tinker with something, or I would do whatever, and stay up all night, and then can't go to school in the morning and stuff like that. So there's this thing called a circadian rhythm, and it's people are genetically predisposed to be either more nocturnal or to have high energy in the morning and so on. And it makes sense to, as much as you can, to align yourself with that circadian rhythm. Mine is super late. And when I just accepted that, and I made the conscious decision that unless it's crucially important, in which case, if it's crucially important, we can say, okay, let's meet at 5 a.m. to do something, and I can meet at 5 a.m. But to me, that also means I might as well not go to bed in the first place. And I'm fine not going to bed once in a while, but I can't do that regularly, right? What I kind of did was that I stopped taking any meetings before 11 a.m. in the morning. And I just said, I'm not working before 11 a.m. And I felt really bad about how am I going to say that? People are going to think I'm lazy, yada, yada. But then maybe they do. So what? I mean, yeah, maybe some people do. I mean, maybe in some people's values. And I think that's so culturally programmed that they think it's inappropriate. But then... yeah, I don't think it should be. I mean, I think it's very unfair that when you say I have a lot of work, I want to sleep in late, like this doesn't make sense to anybody and you'd be frowned upon. But then when people say I can't socialize tonight, I need to go to bed early because I have a lot of work and I want to start an early day, that's kind of very accepted. And I think those are two versions of the exact same thing, right? I mean, you're trying to align yourself with your bodily rhythm so you can be more productive, so you can do the work for other people that they're depending on you. And one is super frowned upon and the other one is right, it's a virtue, right? So I think this was one thing where I just spent time to study it and improved, learned about little things about how do you sleep well. I think buying a good mattress is one of the best investments you can make in your life, because you literally spend almost a third of your life on that mattress. There's no other object in your life that you spend more time in relationship to, probably. I mean, maybe your computer or phone you're as much in contact with, but yeah, and that's one thing. I mean, just figuring out how to improve your sleep. And then there's a lot of things around exercise and diet. I did not care about that at all. I completely didn't believe that there was a connection between how I think and how I feel and my diet. I mean, maybe rationally I wouldn't have disagreed with that, but these days I just think a lot about that quite a bit and try to I'm not kind of religious about it. I don't follow some kind of very specific regimen, but I just continuously try to become aware of how certain foods make me feel. And just to be generally educated about nutrition and stuff like that. Then there's exercise, which makes a massive difference. I mean, a massive difference. Just feeling physically fit changes your body posture, and changes your body posture changes your mindset and mood. Like you can almost do this experiment where you can ask somebody to stand up and wave their hands in the air and imagine something very sad and cry about it. I mean, it's almost impossible for them to start crying. But if you ask them to crawl on the ground and kind of, sit like a fetus, how do you in a fetal position? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it becomes much easier to get sad about something, and you can do the experiment. And when you see it in some simple way like that, it just starts to make sense how important it is to get yourself in good physical health if you want to be in good mental health. And those are kind of that's some of the obvious things. But then there are a lot of other things you can do around just connecting what you do with your values, and creating some kind of a framework around your relationships and boundaries and so on, so you can create some kind of a sane environment for you, in which you can operate, and in which you can get some form of psychological security, if you will, which doesn't mean this would mean that you wouldn't take big risks or anything like that. I mean, yes. I don't think those align. It just means you do it on your own terms in a certain way, and that doesn't need to be something that impacts others either. It just, if you're mindful about it and construct some way of you not being exposed in that sense, and just making sure you operate from a position of which makes sense for you. I'm probably explaining this in a very abstract way at the moment, so it's probably not actionable though. But yeah, there's something there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So to wrap it up, basically this comes back to your hypothesis from earlier on that mind and body are tightly connected. So
yeah, so those are the simple things you can do. Yeah.
All right. So perhaps let's move to some questions from the audience. Miroslav Djukanov here has asked us quite a long one, but perhaps we can try splitting it in a couple of parts. I'll read it out so that everybody is on par. People often sickly stick to the idea of the success. They don't want to fail. Do you consider yourself failing in this case?
I think that's a great question. I actually know Miro. He's an old friend. And hi, Miro. I'm glad you're spending time with us today. But let me think about it. I know what you mean, and I think we just get programmed to have these ideas of success. I think for our parents' generation, it's really important to have a nice car and to have like some fancy brand purse or something like that. I mean, to have these status symbols and to fit in society in a certain way, and those things really programmed a lot of social behavior. I think for our generation, we like to think, and for the next generation, I'm technically a millennial, and then there's a younger generation that kind of has entered massively the workplace after us. I think for them they're also different again, but I don't know if we've changed. I think we've changed for the better. I don't know if we've changed so much. I think these days you don't want. It's not necessarily in many cultures so cool to drive a fancy car, but you wanna have a cool startup and raise money and be in the media or something like that. I mean, there are different status symbols around that. And I was 100% on board with all of that nonsense, I have to say. I mean, a lot of the things I've done in my life have been driven by things like that. I don't know if I've kind of tracked down where they were rooted and what type of imbalances of my character or faults or traumas or whatever I was trying to resolve with these external things. And kind of what I learned through experience the hard way is when you get them or some version of them, you kind of, they lose their meaning very fast, and then you're kind of left with the same starting point pretty much from a mental point of view, if that makes sense. So did you make any progress? Maybe yes, but did you make a significant progress for you feeling more fulfilled? Not always, right? So I think it's very important to first realize that and then understand what other things are at play here. I really like if I may take a detour talk about wealth a little bit, because a lot of people really want to get wealthy or rich or something, and they think that solves a lot of problems. And And I think those external things that we can achieve, I feel there are people that say this is the thing, and then there's other people that say no, this is the thing, this is the opposite of the thing. I mean, this doesn't matter at all. And I think they're both wrong. And well, I'm not the only one that think this is both wrong, because I think if you solve these wealth things and these external world achievement things, like if you become wealthy, wealth will solve all your money problems. And that's it. And if you don't solve your money problems, they're going to lead to other problems, right? I mean, then you also probably can't be super fulfilled if you're living in poverty. And maybe you can become some kind of a monk and kind of denounce all the material world and so on. But I think for the most of us, that's not kind of likely going to happen. And it's a very difficult way to kind of challenge ourselves to that. But then none of these external things solve anything in your internal world. Really, they just solve your money problems. I mean, in that particular case, or maybe a nice car solves your transportation problems, or looking cool in your life problems and stuff like that. So in that sense, I think I've been failing on this in the past. And I've seen how I've had manic behaviors related to kind of getting those external achievements. And I think partially through achieving some of these things, I've been able to come beyond them, and partially in some cases I guess I've realized they're not so important to me, and I've become more aligned with myself. But yeah, does that make sense? I mean, did I kind of go off track on this question, or was this a good answer to the question?
Well, hopefully Miro will let us know in the comment section after
Miro, if you can. Yeah.
By the way, speaking of comment section, even if we don't manage to answer your questions tonight, feel free to still leave comments, and we may come up with other short versions or videos later down the road. But before we round up, so that we have respect for the audience's time and our 1 hour announced slot at least, there was something very interesting that you just mentioned, and really would love to quickly touch base on it. So as far as I understand, what you just said was basically that you have either the possibility for searching happiness outside of you, so with status symbols, achievement, and so on, or inside of you, if I got it correctly. Was that what you said?
Yeah, that I use the word fulfillment.
Fulfillment.
Which I probably treat a little bit different than happiness, but yeah.
So fulfillment, thanks for correction, but still it's a very important one. So how do you find fulfillment outside of yourself? I mean, inside of yourself. So if there would be one thing that we can offer as a takeaway in these last couple of minutes to the audience, how do you find your inner fulfillment?
I think if I had a good answer to this question for you, I should be a published philosopher. And I think people have been trying to answer that sort of thing for hundreds of generations. I mean, if we have since the beginning of humans think, but I don't know if I'm that wise, to be honest. I mean, I am just the thing is, the more you get experience about these things, the more you kind of learn about your where you have gaps. And it's very easy when you get to the beginning of something to kind of say, okay, I don't know anything about this. Then you learn something about it, and you feel like you know 80% about this, and it's going really well. And then you learn more about it, and then you realize, okay, I don't know anything about this. but then you're in a much better place to actually manage that thing. And I think with managing your life, fulfillment, relationships, it's kind of a similar journey, and there's a lot of experience you can get, and you can kind of shortcut parts of you can shortcut parts of that personal growth through personal experience by getting from the wisdom of more experienced people, and they don't need to be necessarily older. I think because we were chatting before the session about if I had to give one advice to the audience, well, what that might be. And I think with these things, very often the answer is it's kind of, they're kind of complicated, so there's probably no silver bullet for it. But if you surround yourself with other people that are intelligent and self-aware and care about solving these things, and you openly communicate and you're open-minded about it, you're likely to find solutions faster than if you just go about it at your own. And I think with this mental health, mental fitness, burnout things and so on, it's I think what you can do is just find sources of knowledge on the internet, if you will, that just are people that are very experienced and recognized, not necessarily importantly recognized, but just have something that seems to come from their personal experience that's deep and extensive, that they've distilled into something that might be applicable to you, and then look for those. And then also find a peer group where you can kind of try to internalize those sort of things. And I think when it comes to fulfillment and figuring out life, it makes sense to approach it in the same way. I think what's hard nowadays is that I guess in previous generations, what people might have done that sort of thing at church or in certain types of communities that were kind of touching on these slightly more spiritual things, if I can call them like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how this has evolved in the modern world. And I think we have a lot more platforms and communities and solutions, but we are not necessarily always so connected because of the incentives of our daily lives. And it's I'm of two minds of how this has changed. I mean, I think we have a lot more resources, but then you also have a lot of more triggers and incentives not to do much with those on the platform of our fulfillment. So I think the first step, like with anything, is to become aware of that sort of thing and to deliberately design areas in your life which tackle these needs. Whether this is through some activities, through some friends, through some sort of reading that you might do. I personally like to follow. Not that I mean, I try to kind of sometimes read up on things like Stoicism or just on some kind of more ancient philosophical thinkers thinking about stuff, but also kind of also to combine it with modern interpretations of those contemplations where. There's this guy that I kind of, well, there's a few, but on that particular topic, I feel there's this guy Naval, who is one of the founders of AngelList, who decided to become a philosopher after he had or to try to kind of work in the space of philosophy. I don't think he wants to. I don't know if he necessarily wants to label himself in that sense. I mean, that would be a bit arrogant, maybe, but. He started to work in that space, and I think he was then reporting that he got a lot of feedback from his peers where what they were saying kind of that he's ruining his reputation career by talking about these fluffy topics after he has this strong reputation as a business leader. But then I think he pushed through it and he managed to, I think, distill some really interesting writings and podcasts and blogs, which his podcast is typically an episode is about 2 to 5 minutes. And he just touches on one of these topics related to sometimes to fulfillment, to success, and so on, which I found very insightful. And I sometimes re-listen them to just pose interesting questions that I can ponder on.
Perfect, Lino. Thank you so much for all your input. Actually, I would use the opportunity to strongly encourage you. Give us a couple of hints of your favorite reads or other resources that we could link in the description section below, so that if anybody found some relevance here or things interesting of what you just mentioned, to have the good opportunity to just follow along and find perhaps inspiration in new places. Thank you so much for the talk tonight. For me, it was a real pleasure, and I've been looking forward for more than 2 months since our previous episode with you, and now I can relate to you even more, knowing slightly different aspect and a bit more of the nuances and then your colors of your personality. So thanks. We'll link various helpful links for Lino and his interests in the comment section in the description. Feel free to follow him. He's all over the social media, also regarding Farstar and business inquiries. As we have already an open promise, feel free to reach out. Now, a couple of comments on Burnout Triumphant series. Tomorrow we are continuing with yet another very interesting Burnout Triumphant, Veligetuba. Again, the same story. We did have her on the first roundtable. However, we did not have enough opportunity to really allow her to fully fledge and explain everything what she went through. So many people asked us, and we invited her especially for this, to actually give her the floor and understand more about her. So make sure to tune in tomorrow once again, or you could also watch on recording, whatever more convenient for you. You can still use the comment sections after our live streams. We would be happy to get your questions, ideas, or proposals for other people that you would like to have on the show, or also certain topics or professions that you find interesting. For example, right now we're running the entrepreneurial, let's say, part of the professional palette, but probably there are a bunch of more other professions that might be relevant for the audience. So feel free to let us know. What would you like to have next? And we'll do our best to cater as good as we can. And last but not least, I'm reminding of DigiBurn Health, your personal self-help app and coach to proactively improve your lifestyle, get a meaningful work-life balance, the one that suits you best and helps you chase your goals, chase your wildest goals, burn bright instead of out. We're launching in a couple of weeks our first beta version, and we are now collecting our first beta users or early adopters. So please make sure to use the link in the description below and just reach out to us or subscribe so that you can get a notification. Once we are out, we would be happy to have you amongst our first 100 users and get your honest feedback how to help you become the best version of yourself. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.
Thank you.